Hi, I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins from Your Black World, and I'm reporting to you from Costa Rica. And you know what? I made an exception this week to interview a young lady that messaged me, and her name is Valerie Still. And Valerie Still, she's currently the record holder at the University of Kentucky in both points and rebounds. But more importantly, she is a brilliant black woman who has a lot to say about the black experience. She's the author of a forthcoming book called Plain Black and Blue. And before I get started, I want to welcome my sister. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, boys. It's so good to. I'm just so excited about meeting you. It's crazy. I've seen you from a distance, and now we actually get this opportunity to hang out some.
You know what? The honor is all mine. I was so impressed. You and I have talked for almost an hour, and you were telling me about the great things. I knew about the great things you did, when I read up on you. But then you told me about your family, about your brother, Art Still, one of the greatest players, and definitely in college football history and NFL history as well. And just so many amazing things that you've done, not just as an athlete though, but also as a human being. So I want to start just from the basics here. Okay. First, let's start with your experience at Kentucky as an athlete, because there's so much that I don't want to try to cover everything in one sentence. So you were, and I didn't know this. I went to University of Kentucky, and now you're the all-time leader in points and rebounds for both men and women. And when did you set this record?
Don't say that too loud. I mean, Big Blue fans may get start getting jittery there. I went to UK. I was there from 1979 to 83.
Hmm.
And when I accepted a scholarship, I knew nothing about UK basketball, period. And they had just won the national championship. Now I know all this. But when I accepted the scholarship, it was only because my brother, Art, had done 4 years there from 74 to 78. He had had a fantastic time there. They loved him. We loved the visit to Kentucky. And there was just this journey that I knew I had to get to Lexington. And I always wanted to be a Wildcat. And so when they offered me a scholarship, knowing my brother, and because I had a pretty good high school career as well, then it was normal. I knew I was going to be a Wildcat. Always did. A,
Wow.
a little poor black girl from Camden, New Jersey, going to Lexington, Kentucky. It was crazy.
Wow. And what's fascinating to me, Valerie, is that, you know, I mean, setting a record like that at a school like that, I mean, that's not typical. I mean, Kentucky's not, it's not some little podunk school with a mediocre athletic program. You're talking about a school that has produced some of the greatest basketball teams in history. Many people consider it to be the greatest basketball program in the country right now. I mean, I think this year, what do they have, like seven guys or six or something that all declared for the
Oh
NBA
yeah.
draft all at once? I mean, Kentucky is the creme de la creme, and so for you to have a record that you set over 30 years ago that still stands today, that says a lot.
But But boys, to put on top of that, and sometimes I hate to speak in terms of socially constructed concepts like black, like race or gender, because they're all socially constructed, to identify yourself. And it's taken me years to break down those, identifying factors because they're all socially constructed. They kind of keep us in boxes. But if you put on top in 1979, it was one of the first years after Title IX where women were allowed to have scholarships. So I was one of the first recipients of a scholarship. So it wasn't only me doing that as an athlete, but during a period where at UK the women were looked down upon. And it was a struggle. The program wasn't there. It was like the dark ages. And so for a woman athlete to come in that environment at UK where basketball, men's basketball is the holy cow, for that to all happen without any kind of support and actually being hit all the time, that makes it even more incredible, I think, than it happening now. And, with my good friend John Calipari, I think he's going to hold that record for me because any of the guys that are scoring that many points are going to be out in 1 year. So, they say records are meant to be broken, but if John keeps up the good work, I'll be okay. I'm
Yeah, that
joking.
yeah, well, you know that yeah, that is an interesting program that he's kind of developed there. I mean, the way he's taken UK in this interesting direction where he seems to make it very plain and clear that he doesn't need you to stay for 2, 3, 4 years. He knows you want to leave and go make money for your family. There's no longer that interesting, what I almost call an interesting farce of an idea that says we're going to educate you, while you're playing here.
Exactly.
What do you think about that? I mean, do you think that it helps or hurts the athletes to be so blatant about it?
Hey, that's the dishonesty about it. I mean, the exploitation has been going on for years and years, and I think you spoke about this in one of your articles as far as a plantation system, and I've kind of, thought in the same way. It really is when the athletes aren't being paid, they're the only ones that are doing all the work but aren't getting any of that benefit. And people say, you get a scholarship. But it's nothing compared to what those athletes bring in. And I think with Calipari, at least he's being honest. He's like saying, okay, this system is what it is. These kids are not coming to school. We're not recruiting these kids to be students. We're recruiting them to be professional athletes. So whether you like it or not, at least he's being honest about it. I don't go along with the whole thing of you bring kids in for a year, and you rotate them out, and it gets younger and younger. If you notice now, middle school now, if you talk about the whole AAU thing, it's ridiculous. How much? I mean, you're just your whole life is based on how fast you can run, how high you can jump. It's for me, it's so complicated. It's much more complicated than what people see it as.
Well, it almost seems to me sometimes, Valerie, that when it comes to young black athletes, because we have so much talent in our community, it's almost like so many of us are corralled into these systems
Yeah,
that just sort of put you on a track, to become an athletic product. Similar to the way a newborn chicken might be put on a treadmill so you can be ready for the KFC truck later on down the line, right? And or pigs being led to slaughter, so to speak. And not this isn't true for every athlete, right? It seems that there are many athletes, and it seems that it happens more so on the female side than the male side. Many athletes who see their athletic ability as an opportunity to educate themselves and to do certain things with their lives, but it seems that so many others can kind of get trapped in this interesting just this athletic vacuum, right? Where you kind of think sports is the be all end all to everything, and so
yeah.
maybe you don't learn how to read. You don't have any other marketable skills, so sports doesn't work out for you. You kind of end up stuck. What, based on your experience and what you've kind of seen in terms of the tragedies, because at a program like Kentucky, you can talk about the great successes like yours and a few others that we've seen. Then you can talk about some athletes where things didn't work out so well. What are your thoughts on that in terms of being a black athlete, sort of at the highest levels, being pushed through that system?
But it's all subjective as far as saying successful, because if an athlete, and this is my case now, one of the reasons why I wrote the book, it's only one of, it's not the main reason I wrote my story, is because at UK, all those years that I had put in the time, had represented the school. Afterwards, went on to play in Italy and in the United States with the new professional leagues. When I came back to UK, wanting to get into a position of leadership, coaching, or helping the program, time and time again, I was told that I wasn't qualified. Now, I was qualified to be at the school for 4 years and, be used, whatever. Maybe that's not a good word. But I think one of the concerning issues is when those athletes come back, and it's not like you want something. I wasn't asking for a handout. I wanted to help the program. I wanted to, after my knees were no longer capable of, propelling me, I wanted to be able to use all that experience and take it into a leadership position, and that just didn't happen. It still didn't. Last a couple weeks ago, I applied to UK for a coaching position, assistant position. I'm not qualified. how's that happen? I mean, maybe you can explain that. I really, that whole concept is like just mind-boggling to me.
Well,
That
oh, go ahead. Please continue.
but
I didn't mean to cut you
no, no,
off.
no, 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 no.
I'll tell you, that's interesting to me too. I mean, um, it would be very difficult for anybody um, to look at what you've accomplished on the court and off the court, and to say, "Oh, she's not qualified." You can't say you're not smart enough. You're almost done with a PhD. You can't say that you don't have the athletic ability because you are arguably the greatest basketball player to ever set foot at a school that has produced tons of great athletes. Um, and so at that point, you have to ask, what's going on here? Because you're right. You have so many athletes that are qualified to be on the court, but not only are they not many of them not qualified, to come back and take roles, administrative roles in those same institutions that use them or that have them on the court, but also you'll see where you have schools like, for example, USC. I pointed this out where if you're a black athlete, you're qualified to be on campus, but if you're a black biologist, you're not qualified. If you're a black professor, you're not qualified. It's because the numbers just suddenly drop way off when you talk about non-athletic contributions that black
Yeah.
people can make to a university. So I agree with you. I don't understand it. I almost wonder why someone can't explain to you. I mean, has anybody ever came to you and said, this is what needs to change for you to be prepared for a position here?
Well, I've heard a number of different. The latest thing is that with the recent, recruiting and the and this is it's hard, being a person that thinks to accept or understand somebody's reasoning that a person with my experience, as far as coaching, I coach high school, I coach the professional and the WNBA, and with my experience as working with kids, I've developed foundation. I had a foundation for kids. I work in schools now in Camden, New Jersey. What experience would an assistant coach need to be productive at a university when that university is saying you're still not qualified? You're not relevant to our situation. You wouldn't be able to function. I don't. I'm trying to understand that and it happens a lot of time with, and I'm going to use socially constructed concepts, black women. I mean, Cheryl Miller now is. Do you know where Cheryl Miller is right now?
Where is she?
She's coaching a, I want to say, NIAI team maybe.
Really?
In and a lot of the black women are told you're not qualified. Cheryl Miller, with what she knew, not.
Cheryl Miller could easily be considered the greatest basketball player ever, including Michael Jordan, or she was right up there with her, right?
But she doesn't have, and she coached in the WNBA for a long time. But she's at a NAIA school, I believe, because she had a hard time finding, getting a for a D1 school to allow her to come in because she wasn't experienced. Cynthia Cooper for a long time, she's at USC right now, but she had to work up through the ranks as well with everything she did. She was at a historically black university for a while, and it took her years and years to be able to be a head coach at a D1 school. But from in my case, I can't even get an assistant coaching position. And at UK, I said, listen, I'll do an internship. Just what for me, it's trying to find the reasoning behind that. And you study this more than I did. I did my master's in African and African American studies and my PhD in sports humanities, but I'm still trying to figure that out. But I think it's a social issue though.
I think it's a huge social issue, and I'm curious. And maybe you don't know the answer to this question because I sure don't. Um, what organizations are there in existence for, say, black female for basketball players, maybe coaches, former WNBA players, anything? I mean, is there anything that that's organized that can sort of represent the issues of black women within sports?
I think they have the Black Women Coaches Association. I think, but that's a good question. And I think one of the things that have happened with sports, and this has happened in academia, is that like sports or women's studies have never really embraced sports, which I've always found kind of incredible because I think one of the factors, the areas in life where you can most influence changes in how people view women is in sports. But academia has never really embraced sports, say women's studies. They've never embraced, the whole sports element. And so if you can combine the two somehow, and that's what I try to do, combine the two. But how do you do that? How do you make feminists or women's studies realize, okay, we need to be looking at some of the issues that are happening in women's sports, like the fact that women coaches, there's a lot of men coaches now that have taken those positions.
Hmm. Well, that's so interesting. I think that's worth considering. I mean, it almost seems um, that black women are left behind, left at the back of the bus, even more so than men within sports. Almost like you guys are sort of forced to fight for the things that men had to fight for in the 70s and the 80s. Because I'm seeing more black men getting these, very prominent
Uh-huh.
roles as coaches and even team owners now. And you just don't see that same opportunity set for women. And I think that needs to be spoken about more, because it's unfortunate when you see somebody as great as, say, as Cheryl Miller, not get the glory that she deserves for what she did for sports, or yourself. I mean, the fact that you hold these records that you've held for 30 years at this institution where basketball is almost like a religion. It's almost criminal that you would sort of be in the in the fine print of UK basketball history. Because you should be right up there with these guys that are winning the championships and stuff like that. And you know what it reminds me of? My goddaughter goes to University of Kentucky, and she worked at the front desk in the Wildcat Lodge. That
Uh-huh.
fancy luxury hotel that the basketball players stay in. And
Yeah, I talk about that in my book. Yeah.
yeah, this place is ridiculous. It's amazing. So, and I used to work. And it's funny because she has the same job that I had in the same dorm that I worked in. The Wildcat Lodge has moved though; it's in a different building.
Right,
And I
right.
went in and I saw that they had this mural painted up. In case you wondered, the brainwashing is real thick when it comes to college sports, and I think every university does this. When you move into your dorm, I think they move them into a special dorm because they want them thinking about basketball all the time. Anybody who thinks that college sports is extracurricular is out of their mind. It becomes a full time job. So you come into this dorm, they've got basketball stuff all over the walls, all this motivational images, all these things. It's like basketball, 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 and it has a huge impact on the conscious and subconscious mind. And so anyway, they had this mural painted of some of the great UK teams of the past, and I noticed that when they showed different players and different teams from different years, they only went back like 4 or 5 years. And so, if, in her mind, she thought that UK basketball has only been great since 2007, 2008. I said, girl, let me tell you the history. There's at least 60 years of greatness at this school that existed long before any of the stuff that you're seeing right now. Let me tell you about Kenny Walker. Let me tell you about,
Uh-huh.
the Twin Towers in the 80s. Let me tell you, etc. So, anyway, that's what. So when I kind of see a great player like yourself, kind of not mentioned as much as you should be, it reminds me of that moment I had with my daughter in the dorm. I
Yeah.
mean, how do you? I mean, do you feel the same way? Or what are your
But
thoughts on that?
but see, the recognition is not for me. It's not about the recognition. The back. I mean, that was great. Those. I don't know if I'm having some feedback.
Yeah.
Those records. I mean, they're points. They're. The more important thing is that how it happened, why it happened, and if I can use that to propel me to something that's going to change society. Those points. I mean, that's not going to it doesn't influence me or affect me any if I can't convince people that I'm a qualified person. I should be valued for other things besides just scoring points. And right now, I can't seem to convince. And most people won't say anything. I don't want it to seem like you know, I'm crying about it. I want to really figure this out. If there's something going on, is if it's systemic and it's happening to more people than me, then let's try to figure it out. What is it our society that's doing this? What? How can we change that?
Okay, sorry about that. I turned my audio down so that people could
What
hear you
happened?
because you mentioned the feedback. Sorry about that. Just so people, I told you people know that we're substance. We're not about flash. So sometimes we have technical difficulties, but the message comes through loud and clear. Now, I agree with you. I think it's important. I think that when people speak up about an injustice, it does heighten that awareness, and and what I do find unfortunately is that a lot sometimes the person who speaks up the most doesn't benefit from the path that they're clearing, right? Because unfortunately, it's very difficult in our society to for a black person, for a person of color that speaks on injustice, or even any person, not just it's very easy to be labeled a troublemaker or something like that. And I always go back to and I recite this to my daughters all the time. Laurel Thatcher Ulrich's quote that great women are rarely well behaved. And I think that there are times where we have to misbehave a little bit. I mean, you have to have people that just they just say, you know what, I'm going to take one for the team. I'm going to speak up, even if I get mistreated because of it, because somebody does benefit. I think about some of the battles I fought where I was instantly labeled as a troublemaking kind of person, but I would see other people gain something from what I did, from my sacrifice, right? So, and it makes sense because you mentioned the rich history in your family with William Still being your great great grandfather, the father of the Underground Railroad. Well, he made sacrifices that benefited people that were born 100 years
Right.
after he died, right? So really, that's what we all are. We're all part of a long lineage of individuals who built the community in which we live and who will build future communities, right? Now, I want to ask you about this, and because I mentioned William Still, but I'm not even going to talk about that very much today because I want that to be a separate conversation because he deserves a whole conversation between you and I because of what he gave to your family and to the world. But I want to ask you this: when I was in Kentucky, one of the things that I felt, and you can tell me if you felt the same way, was I felt that there was a deliberate effort there, as there is in many universities, to kind of take the black athlete and pull him away from the black community, to kind of, sort of keep him or her away from the things that were going on in the community. When I was at Kentucky, we had a protest. The black students had a huge rally because that lasted over a month. We were protesting for a month because a black woman had been attacked with a knife on campus because she had spoken out on against racism, and the students threatened to kill her. And the student ended up dropping out of school and everything, and the university wanted to keep it under the rug because the school was about to play in the Final Four, and they were worried about the implications. And I remember
Yeah.
that some of the athletes wanted to support us, but they said, "Well, we really can't because we're afraid because we're going to get in trouble if we do." Um, did you see that kind of same thing when you were there? Did you feel that kind of athletes were kind of kept away from the black experience in general?
Well, I can tell you from my experience, I didn't even know there was a black community in Lexington. I mean, you have downtown, but the school was it's a few blocks away from downtown. And I didn't even know there was a black community until my sister came out my senior year to live with me. And she was really into African American history. And so she met Chester Grundy, who was at UK at the time, and she started interacting with the black community. And I was like, whoa, man, you got to be careful now. I don't know what happens down there, but you make sure you watch yourself. And so maybe there was. I didn't know it. Like you're saying that it was almost hidden that, but I think to some extent, maybe not now, but that was back in the late 70s, 80s. Definitely we were kind of protected and kept on campus.
Mm.
So again, I don't know if that they were doing that on purpose or if that's just what happens. But are you saying that happens now as well?
Um,
Because
you
I
know,
think it's a little hard. It would be harder to do that now.
I think it's harder, but I imagine that there's always an interest in those who are making money. Believe I mean, college sports is a multi-billion-dollar industry, so there's always an interest in protecting your assets, right? And it just it really. I think I don't think things are that much different. For example, if you get into some of the protests that have occurred recently with Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, the stuff in Baltimore, I don't think college athletes. I imagine if athletes were very outspoken about this, say going on Twitter and saying things about it, they'd probably get a visit from somebody in the administration that would say, "Hey, chill out with that stuff. You don't want to get in the middle of that." That's my impression. What do you think?
Yeah, well, most definitely. I mean, these schools, the programs now, they're billion-dollar programs. They have to they have a system in place that are checking on those athletes, making sure they checking Twitter, uh, uh, Facebook accounts. It's much different than when I was in college, and but I'm pretty sure that there's a protective net around the athletes now that wasn't there when I was playing.
Well, and I think that's so interesting, and I consider it to be a little bit unfortunate for the black community because you have so many. The black athlete is one of the most powerful uh, individuals in the entire community. Because they have these massive platforms
Yeah.
and they're speaking to the world, and I don't think it's a coincidence that there's so many black athletes are tricked into sort of fall into that trap of not being as well educated as they should be, or thinking that the world revolves around money and bling and all this other stuff that some athletes get caught up in. And it seems like there's a lot of wasted potential there. I do see some adjustments, though. I see some major athletes like LeBron James, really stepping out on some important social issues, unlike his predecessors. If you remember, Jordan and Kobe, they didn't get involved in anything like anything political. They just it was all
Hmm.
about making the money. I want to make Nike happy or whatever, or I want to take care of myself. Whereas you see LeBron kind of taking this very globalized, team-oriented view of the world. In fact, he conducts him. He seems to conduct himself in the world the way he conducts himself on the court. If you look at the kind of player he is, he makes the players around him better. He'll pass the ball instead of shooting it all the time, and I think that is a reflection of who he is as a person. As you know, I mean, you're a basketball player, but more so than me. I don't know about you, but I can always tell a guy's personality or a person's personality by how they play basketball. Is that your experience too?
But but I think boys, I think part of it is that athletes are really not educated. And I don't say this in any derogatory way, but most athletes do not have a history or do not know their history. I didn't know my history until I did my master's degree in African American studies. I have this rich family history with William Still and then his brothers who were sold into slavery in Lexington. I didn't know any of that, and if we don't know our history, then we're destined to repeat it. And that's why I think most athletes, they're living in a bubble. Their existence is much different than the typical black experience in the United States. And if you look at even the 60s, the athletes that did get involved, say Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or Carlos Smith and the guys at the 1968 Olympics, when those guys took a stand, it's because they knew the issues. They were experiencing that day. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar said, he was getting that on the streets, being treated. They were all being treated the same. Whereas these athletes now, black athletes, are being treated in a different way because now the gap is between the have and the have-nots, and so they can't relate most of them to these experiences because they don't know the history.
Mm.
And so again, and I don't know if that's part of the system. I was shocked that not many of the African American players major or even take courses in African American history.
Interesting.
Um,
So,
that just seems kind of odd.
so in your experience as an athlete, and what you've seen, there's a huge debate, Valerie. I want to ask you about where there are people who say Look, athletes that go to college, it's their job to get educated. If they leave that school and they don't get the education that they deserve, it was their decision. And then there's some people who say, no, it's the university's responsibility to at least do what they can to facilitate, um, an athlete's opportunity to get an education. And I ask you this because I remember a specific player who's very good at our school who left campus, and the whole story on the campus was that he really couldn't read beyond, say, the second grade level. um, and I remember thinking, how can this happen? How can you get through college classes without knowing how to read? And my general conclusion, honestly, is that this was facilitated. That there were people that kind of looked the other way. That there was pressure put on people to make sure that this person got through his classes. So to me, it's hard to look at something like that and put that solely on the back of that 20-year-old kid who's so caught up in the hype of basketball, as opposed to also looking at the institution, the mentors he had on campus, the people that were guiding his day-to-day actions. Now that was my assessment, but feel free to disagree with me. Tell me what you think about that, because you went to college and you were very well educated. So I'm curious to know your point of view on that.
Well, it's a larger problem. It's a larger issue, and it stems back to, if you go back to the communities that a lot of these athletes come out of. I mean, if you look at what's going on in Baltimore now, I mean, it's like systemic that these communities are in situations that they are, that they only encourage a certain mentality. They only allow so much growth. I mean, whether it's in education or family structure. I work in Camden, New Jersey now. I was shocked at what's going on in Camden schools. And, and boys, we can't even get into it because there's so much. And if you're not hands on, like if you're living in a certain bubble, which I lived in a long time, you kind of wonder, well, why don't these people do this? Or, why, it's so rooted in our society and in our culture. Um, what's happening that we don't even, if you're not, if you're living in the suburbs, if you're not in con, you can't even see the subtleties of how it can shape people, how these communities or how these systems can shape people. And then, yeah, they get to college and they may not be able to, they've been a basketball player. And so it's the whole system. You know what I'm talking about? There's so many different things that go in my mind that you can't pinpoint it on just one specific thing or who's the cause or who's to blame. It's like we got to fix the whole, as a people, as Americans, we have to fix this. You know what I'm trying to say? I know
No, that
it's
that
kind of generic, but
no, that makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense what you're saying, and I think it seems that it's complex and it goes deeper than just looking at the individual or just looking at the institution. It seems like you're saying we also have to look at our whole society.
yeah.
Interesting.
And this other thing, when I was growing up, we grew up poor. Okay, we didn't have a lot. We live in the projects. That did not take away from my mom's values. My father was in the house. He abused alcohol. I don't say he was an alcoholic because that's not who he was, but that's what he used to get through what he was. I didn't have a great relationship with him, but he was in the house. But my mother instilled in us values. So we weren't victims. It was never, it wasn't about our color. It wasn't about me being a female, even though she even didn't want me to do certain things because I was a female. And so at a certain point, it's also the person, even in that situation, there's got to be something within us that lets us know, like that clicks on and says, okay, this isn't right, or I need to do this, or I'm going to propel myself in this way. And so, yeah, the system is what it is. But I think we all have the possibility of recognizing that and staying true to ourselves and then pushing through that. It's not easy, but I know in my case it can be done. And through that whole system, my book also is about rediscovery, self-discovery, because from that little girl in Camden that didn't have anything, that society told her she was black, she was poor, she was female, she didn't. From that little girl, I still had that desire that I knew that I was more than that. But with the system, as I went through it, I was a basketball player. Then I was UK's, all-time leading scorer. Then I was. It took away from who I was. Then I started believing in what everybody was telling me. But what happened was that I came full circle around. So now when UK tells me I'm not qualified, um, you're less than what we need or what we want. Now, since I've been through that whole process, I've reached back to when I was that little girl. I know who I am now. I know, and I think most people don't know who they are, and so they get caught up. Oh, I'm in this situation because I'm black or I'm female, or you know. In the end, it's going to be what you do to propel yourself, knowing who you are.
Mm,
So
wow, I love it.
that's a lot of information, in a nutshell. But
That's amazing information. Very motivational. And I think it's important for people to hear. I would I would just love for you to be speaking to kids all over the world, all over the country at least. I think there are so many young people, especially young ladies, but young people, period, who I think could
yeah,
benefit so much from the
young
things you have to
people.
say. And one of the things I learned personally from playing sports, I can only play in high school. I wasn't good enough to play college. But,
Hmm.
sports carried me through my whole life. It taught me a lot about persistence and setting goals and working consistently and, being a team player, all kinds of stuff that I still apply to my life to this day. What I don't understand about this world, and it's a reminder of just how much injustice there is I don't understand why a person like yourself that has so much to offer isn't booked all around the country to go talk to girls basketball camps or and boys too. You know what I mean? Just to just really share what you have with the world. So I'm glad I could just be a part of that. And I'm gonna grab onto you. And I'm glad you reached out to me. You sent me an email.
But boys, what I do though, and that's I'm excited. I told you this when we first talked. I believe in like those energies, and when things are supposed to happen, connections happen. I believe when you desire something, the whole universe, conspires to get that to you. And so it, I influence. Like I was telling you, I work in Camden, New Jersey every day as a substitute teacher. I go in unknowingly. I don't have to be on a platform. And what I do though is I share who I am with the kids that I work with every day, and I believe that they have pulled in, and I think those spirits, they're pulling in those energies. There are people in those situations that want to do good. They want to get past the system. They don't want to be put in a box. And so I think no matter what, if it's meant to be, it's going to happen. And if you have that desire and passion, and I'm not saying that now like I used to say it when they would pay me $500 or $1,000 to go work with some kids as a professional athlete. I'm saying that genuinely because, and it's not about the sports. Sports have changed so much. I'm almost anti-sport. I'm not anti-sport, but almost because it's no longer a thing where kids can enjoy themselves. It's all about, am I going to be the next professional athlete? Am I going to get a scholarship? I think the important thing now for kids is to understand who they are, their history. Their history. I think history, is his story, her story, is my story, is your story. Who are you? Who are you really? And not what society. And sports now, I'm telling you, it starts when they're in middle school, where you got AAU, who's the best player, who's. It's not about that. That sports is something I did. It wasn't who I was. And now I finally realized I'm not UK's all-time leading scorer. I'm Valerie Still. It's much different, and that's the only way, boys, that I'm able to take UK someone telling me you're not qualified. You know what I mean? You're not qualified. That used to break me down. It used to, oh man, I'm not worthy. I'm not in. No, I know who I am. But in order to get through, I think there's a bigger issue that has to be brought out, and maybe us talking about it will start the conversation. It'll start that dialogue. Okay, is this going on? Is this just with this girl here, or is it with this woman here, and maybe things will change.
Well, I know they're going to change. There's no question about it, and no, it'll change in no small part to your contributions. And what I really love about what you're saying is, I like how you take into context your athletic accomplishment and your educational achievement and see them as symptoms of who you are as opposed to determinants of who you are. You're not, as you mentioned, you're not UK's all-time leading scorer. You're Valerie Still, and because of what Valerie Still represents, then these great accomplishments are going to just be offshoots of the
Yeah,
spirit and the energy that she brings to the table when she gets involved in anything she does. And I like that a lot because it reminds me of when I saw Vince Young, the football player, on the cover of ESPN the magazine. And one of the things that they quoted, the quote that they had there was, he said, "I was born to play quarterback at the University of Texas." And at that moment, I felt very sorry for him because I said, here you have this young black man who could do so many things,
uh-huh.
but he's just a young man, period, a human being, who has defined himself solely and almost entirely as a college football player for the University of Texas. And you saw kind of how things kind of fell apart for him when his football career didn't work out
Yeah,
because the death of his football career was the death of him, maybe spiritually. At least that was my interpretation of it, because there were all these reports about him being suicidal and all these other things after he wasn't able to play anymore. So I want to say thank you for everything you shared with me today. This has been awesome.
well, no, it's been my pleasure, man. And I'm just glad we've connected, and make sure you go get my book when it comes out.
Oh, I'm gonna buy two copies. I'm gonna give one to my daughter and I'm gonna read one myself. And I want everybody else to check out Miss Still's book, Professor Still. I'm gonna call her Professor Still because
No, no, I'm Valerie
she's
Still.
well,
I'm a
okay.
still.
Okay, well, all right. Well, Miss Still, we're gonna call her Miss Still. I'll call it that's reluctantly now, but I want everybody to check out her book when it comes out. The working title so far is called Plain Black and Blue, but the book is not yet released, so the title may shift. But either way, I'm gonna make sure you get the actual title, and I'm gonna talk to Miss Still in the future as well. And so everybody who doesn't know, this is Miss Valerie Still. She's the record holder in points and rebounds at the University of Kentucky. She's also earning her PhD. And what is your PhD going to be in again? Remind me.
Sports humanities.
Sports humanities. Okay, and she has a master's in African American studies, so she knows a whole lot of really good stuff that I think can benefit a lot of people. Valerie, you got a website or anything? Any way people can get in touch with you?
No, right now, and I do not. Facebook,
Okay.
Twitter, my Twitter. I can't even remember my. I mean, I'm on those constantly, but I'm on Twitter and I'm on Facebook.
Okay, okay, and also also send me any information you want people to have too, and I can put it in
Okay,
with this
great.
post so people can get in touch with you. And I'm going to talk to her in the future. And by the way, everybody, I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins from Your Black World. And but just so you don't forget, we have a new film out called Resurrecting Black Wall Street about the Black Wall Street atrocity in 1921, where hundreds of black people were killed, 600 businesses burned to the ground, all in the middle of a riot that was not started by black people. So when people talk about rioting in Baltimore and how heinous it is, understand that we weren't the ones who invented rioting. It's been used against us for a very long time. So I hope you'll support the film. It's at resurrectingblackwallstreet.com. That's resurrectingblackwallstreet.com. And until we meet again, please stay strong, be blessed, and be educated. We are gone. Peace.